Okay, we're back. And so we just need to finish up chapter 25. And this next part of the chapter really deals with setting a selling price. So if you remember way back when we converted from financial accounting to managerial accounting, I said that, hey, really the only thing that we have control over are costs, because selling price is generally dictated, right, either by the market, right, our competitors, and really the elasticity of demand for our product, all right. And so I mentioned that there's very few scenarios where we talk about setting the selling price. Well, this is it, all right. And so this is only a little bit of a chapter, okay, where we actually talk about revenues and not costs. So let me bring up where we left off last class period. All right. And let me get rid of my picture so that you don't look at the ceiling as I'm writing on this. All right, and so setting normal product selling prices. Normal selling price is a target selling price to be achieved in the long term. All right, and so really we're not looking at short-term fluctuations. What is the true selling price of our product? The normal selling price must be set high enough, right, to cover all costs and expenses, both fixed, variable, product, and period, all right, and hopefully to provide a reasonable amount of profit. So let me get my markers here, all right, and so a reasonable amount of profit. Now, I do want you to know that they walk you through several different methodologies when it comes to setting the selling price. The other methods are discussed in the appendix, all right? And so I will briefly bring that up, but it's it's more conceptual than it is calculations. And so setting a normal selling price, managers use one or two market methods, all right? Again, to determine the selling price. We can look at the demand-based concept, right? That's where they set the price according to the demand for the product. Right? If there's high demand for the product, the price goes up. If there's low demand, we lower it. Then there's a competitor base, all right? And the competition base sets the price according to the price offered by its competitors, all right? And so it's kind of funny, when I started working for Faith Writing Company, the t-shirt company that I worked for in Hawaii, we did not do any kind of market research to, the demand for our product and, setting a selling price. Because again, this is an economic concept, right? The more demand for your product, right, the less quantity that you produce has a upward increase on price. And, it really all depends on the elasticity of demand. And to give you an example of elasticity of demand, I'm pretty cheap when it comes to buying candy bars. I love candy bars, don't get me wrong, all right, but I'm unwilling to pay $1, all right? I'm probably unwilling to pay 75 cents for a full-size candy bar, right? But man, if the price on the candy bars drop, okay, like when I used to live in Dowagiac, Rite Aid used to have these sales on candy bars, right? Where I can guarantee, I didn't plan on going in and buying a candy bar. I went in for something else, but they had candy bars, 25 cents each. I probably hadn't spent a dime on a candy bar in the last 3 years. And, but because of the price had dropped so dramatically, I walked out of there paying $8 for candy bars. I kept saying, wow, I'll try this one. I've never tried this one. And, 25 cents, what, I'm not losing anything here. All right. That is something that is elastic. Right? The demand changes, right, when price changes. An example of something that is inelastic, right, would be insulin. All right. So I don't know how many of you guys are type 2 diabetics, okay, or type 1, I should say. Type 1 takes insulin more frequently. But if you're type 1 diabetic, you need insulin to live, all right? And so if you don't get it, you die. And so you're pretty much stuck with having to pay with whatever price the insulin company is charging, right? Now, thankfully, we have government regulation and insurance and all that jazz, all right? But, okay, here's the flip side, okay? If you're, not a type 1 diabetic, type 1 or 2 type diabetic, if they have a great sale on insulin, it's not like you're going to run out and get some, are you? It's like, whoo-hoo, good deal on insulin. I'm going to go get me some. No, because you know what happens if somebody who doesn't need insulin takes insulin? They can die from that. All right. So, it's, that is something that is inelastic in nature, right? The change in price has almost no impact, all right, on the demand. And so that's really what we're looking at here as far as demand and competitive based concepts. Okay? Those both are not what we're going to be doing. All right. As I said before here, when we set our t-shirts for Faith Routing Company, we did not do some sort of research on what our the demand for our product was. No, we just looked at our competitors, all right? And we said, hey, everybody else is selling their t-shirts for $8. Let's set our selling price for $8. All right. And so, that is a beneficial way, but you'd also want to take that information and, plug it into one of these three methods. All right. So in this PowerPoint, we're going to be covering this method, okay, which is product costs. And if you remember, product costs, right, are direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead, right? Where total cost, okay, would be our product cost from above plus our period cost. And variable cost would be direct materials, direct labor. Oh, that's an L. Direct labor, variable factory overhead, all right, and variable period cost. Okay. These two are dealt with, all right, in the appendix. Okay. So, but really what it comes down to is what costs do you need to cover? Right? And so cost plus methods determine the normal selling price by estimating a cost per unit and adding a markup, all right, to that as follows. Normal selling price, cost amount per unit, all right, plus the markup. Management determines the markup based on the desired profit on hand. And usually, okay, if you remember when we talked about return on investments, okay, and more specifically when we talked about, what was that? I can't remember now. All right, but basically where we took our fixed assets, and we multiply it times the required rate of return. Okay. So the markup should be sufficient, right, to earn a desired profit, plus to cover any costs and expenses that are not included in that cost amount. Right? And so under product costs, okay, we're only looking at direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. We're identifying those. And so we're going to mark it up, okay, to from our cost, our product cost per unit, okay, enough to set our selling price that will cover all of our period costs and our desired profit. So the estimated selling price, okay, or the estimated selling expenses, administrative expenses, and desired profit are included in that markup. The markup per unit is then computed and added to the product cost per unit to determine the normal selling price. And so there's a method, oops, wrong way. Okay, there's a 5-step method, all right, that we're going to walk through in this thing, all right? And so again, what we're doing, this is a great way to visualize it, all right? Our product costs, again, are direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead, all right? And so we need, all right, to have a markup. Okay, this is our selling price. That is enough, all right, to cover, all right, so this is our markup. to cover our selling expenses and our desired profit. So if I can, all right, let me show you, okay, what a total cost, right? So I said that there's different methods, right? There's the product cost, the total cost, and the variable cost. Okay, so total cost is going to look something like this, all right? Total cost consists of direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead, okay? It's going to have, your period cost, which is our admin expenses and selling expenses. And so really, all right, our markup is going to be a lot smaller as far as a percentage to our selling price. This only has to be enough to cover, all right, your desired profit. Okay. And variable cost, all right, you just have, we're not going to do this one, all right, but it'd just be the variable cost would be on the bottom, okay, the denominator, all right, and your fixed and desired profit is going to be in the numerator. And so the product cost concept applied using steps listed below, okay? And so step one, we're going to estimate the total product costs, right? And so we're going to direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead, get our total. We're going to divide that, all right? Well, we're going to divide that by the total product cost, all right? By the expected units, all right? And really all we're doing is coming up with a cost per unit. We're going to estimate the total selling administrative. We're going to use that a little bit later. So I probably would have done 1, 3, and then 2, or whatever. All right, step 4 is compute the markup percentage. All right, and so what we're going to do is we're going to have our desired profit, all right, and our total selling and administrative expenses. All right. To come up with our desired profit, all right, we're basically going to take the desired rate of return times the total assets, okay, and that's going to give us our desired profit. Determining the markup, all right, so once we've got our markup percentage, we're just going to take that markup percentage, okay, multiply it times our product cost per unit, which was step 3, okay, and that's going to give us our markup per unit. And so all we're going to do is take that markup per unit and add it to the product cost per unit that we did in step 3 again, okay, and that's going to give us our selling price. So let's use some numbers, all right? Hopefully a lot easier to see, okay? And so we have our, we anticipate making 100,000 calculators, all right? And so we extend, all right? Our direct materials are going to be $3 each, all right? Direct labor is $10, okay? Our factory overhead is not all variable, so that's why we don't have times 100,000. So we come up with this. So we have our total production costs, right? Manufacturing costs of $1.5 million. We add this, okay, and then we have our total cost. Okay, we would have used this total cost if we had done the total cost method, but really we're going to only use, all right, this $1,500,000. Okay. We have our desired rate of return, okay, and so we're just going to multiply that, just because they kind of pop it up here. We had invested assets of 800,000. We multiply that times 20%. Okay, and so we have $160,000 is our desired profit. Okay. And so we're going to take step 1. Right? We have our total product cost, 1.5 million. Okay. Like I said, I usually skip number 2. All right, go straight to number 3. All right, we know that we're going to produce, all right, 100,000 units of calculators, right? And so it comes out to be $15 per unit. In step 4, okay, we're going to say, hey, we have our desired profit. Okay, if you remember, we came up with $160,000. All right, okay. We're going to add that to our total selling and administrative expenses. All right, so they just gave us that number. And we're going to divide, all right, by our total product cost. Right? So our total product cost, direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead. And it comes up with 22%. So we have a 22% markup. And so we're going to take, again, all right, our cost per unit, okay, times the 22%, right? And that comes up with $3.30. We add that back, all right, to our cost. Right? And so our selling price is going to be this $18.30 per unit. Okay. Guess what? If you do the same calculations, all right, in the appendix using total cost, you come up with $18.30. If you do it based on variable costs, guess what? You come up with $18.30. All right. It's not, any kind of huge surprise because you're using the same numbers. All right. It just depends on what's on the bottom and what's on the top. Because if we were to do the total cost markup percentage, right, what we would do, okay, is we'd have, let me get the right. And you can look at this. We just have our desired profit divided by total cost. Right. Total cost would be selling, administrative, all right, direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Okay. With that being said, all right, when we're trying to set the selling price, a lot of times we can anticipate, all right, that our selling price is going to decline. It may decline, again, this is, again, an economic concept. It may decline because new manufacturers are going to enter the market because, we're making more money than we should be, or technology changes, and so we know that our selling price is going to decrease. Right? So we need to be able to account for that. In order to account for that, what we're going to do is we're going to, really focus in on the costs. Right? And that's what we're doing here when we're target costing. If we know that we're going to have a certain percentage decline, but yet we still want to stay profitable, we're going to have to cut our costs. Right? And so we're going to target what those costs got to be, all right, and then basically work backwards. It's a method of setting prices that combines market-based pricing with a cost reduction emphasis. Under target costing, a future selling price is anticipated. Okay, we refer to that as drift. Using a demand-based or competition-based method, the target cost is then determined by subtracting a desired profit from the expected selling price. And so if we do that, we are able then to come up with our targeted cost. Your targeted cost consists of all your costs, your selling, administrative, direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead. Right? And so what our goal is try to meet, right, that cost. So here's a great picture, right? We're currently selling at $800. Okay. We know, okay, because of the competition and stuff like that, that our selling price is going to drift down to $500. Just so you know, this actually happened with Apple when they came out with their first iPhone. Okay? They sold it to all their customers who loved all Apple products. All right, and so they stayed out in line for 3 hours or 3 days, not hours, my bad. Waiting in line to get that iPhone. Right? I actually had a friend who did that. Okay? Well, the problem was 3 months later, because of the introduction of the Android, okay, demand waned, and so they ended up dropping their price, okay, to $500. Okay, now I don't know if this was expected or unexpected, all right, but it definitely pissed off all of those people who spent $800, all right, for that iPhone. Because if they would have waited 3 months, okay, they could have gotten it for a lot less. Well, Apple was really smart in this scenario because you know what they did? They sent out to everybody who paid $800. They sent out a $300 voucher, or I'm sorry, not 300. $300 voucher to make up this difference. Okay, to the Apple Store or the App Store, all right, which really didn't cost them anything, all right, because they owned those. Right? And so that's what's basically happening. So if we know that our price is going to drift down to $500 and we still want to maintain our desired profit margin, what we're going to do is we're going to have to cut our costs out. And so cutting costs can come in various different ways, all right? They can either simplify the design, reduce direct materials, outsource this to China for direct labor, right? And hopefully identifying any waste that we can cut out of this. The last thing that we need to discuss in this chapter, right, is production bottlenecks. Okay? A production bottleneck is a constraint, right, or a point in the manufacturing process where the demand for the company's product exceeds the ability to produce that product. And so in order to deal with this, we have to apply this theory of constraints. It is a manufacturing strategy that focuses on reducing the influence, right, of bottlenecks on production process. And so with this, we're basically, let me give you an example. In our t-shirt manufacturing, we dealt with the guy that made our t-shirts or screen printed our t-shirts. The name of his company was called Hocus Pocus, right? And so it was funny because after he landed us as a client, he went out and bought this huge automated, t-shirt screening machine, right? It could do 8-color separation. It was just a wonderful thing. The problem was he spent all his money on this big old machine, right, that allowed him to produce t-shirts really fast, okay? However, and if you were in my class when we talked in Accounting 201, when we talked about the spontaneously combusting t-shirts, okay, all t-shirts have to go through basically an oven, right, that cures the ink onto your t-shirt. Right? So if you've ever had a t-shirt where you washed it a couple times and in the screen prints, some areas it starts to fade, right, or wash away. Well, that's because they didn't cure that t-shirt long enough, right? They didn't put it in this oven long enough. And so these ovens, or we call them the cookers, I don't know why, they go at a certain speed and at a certain temperature, right? Because if you rush it, you end up with an uncured t-shirt, right? Or if it's too hot, it automatically burns your t-shirts. Or if it's too low, again, it doesn't cure properly and half of your design washes away, all right? And so that was a bottleneck, all right, for Hocus Pocus. See, they didn't have enough money to buy a second cooker, all right? And so even though they could pump out a lot of t-shirts really fast, they couldn't cure them, right, or put them through the cooker any faster. And so they basically had a guy, slowly working late into the night, laying these t-shirts out on a conveyor belt that would bring them through the cooker and, cure the thing. So, he probably shouldn't have spent all his money on that big old 8-color separation machine. And I think it could do something like, I want to say 12 t-shirts or 24 t-shirts at a time, right? He should have bought a smaller automated screen printing machine and bought an additional oven in order to cure those t-shirts because it was a bottleneck for him. And so, right, when a company has a production bottleneck, it should attempt to maximize its profits, right, taking into account that bottleneck. And so here we have Pride Craft Tool Company, all right, and they make 3 wrenches, all right, small, medium, and large. Okay, and so if you look at their contribution margin, remember that contributes to profit and covering your fixed costs. It looks, all right, as if this makes the most per unit, okay? But that's not taking into account this bottleneck. All right, so if you know anything about metal, all right, you know that the tensile strength of metal is developed through the heating, cooling, and reheating, all right, of metal. And so this Pride Craft Tool Company, all right, they have a heat treatment process, okay, which is their bottleneck, all right? See, To make the small wrench, it takes 1 hour, okay, to run that small wrench through. However, it takes 8 hours to run the large wrench through. And so to maximize profit, okay, we're going to look at them as a contribution margin per bottleneck hour. All right, and so that's what they've done here. And so if you look, you can actually see when we take into that in that constraint, we can make 8 small wrenches in the same time it takes to make 1 large wrench. Okay, and so we can see that if we look at this at a bottleneck, that this one is actually more profitable. The small wrench is more profitable, okay, than the large wrench. And so should we just make small wrenches? No, all right, because we have to also take into account, we talked about this earlier, the product mix, right? So every time, you know, Pride Craft Tool sells wrenches within a year, okay, they're probably going to sell, you know, maybe, you know, 5 to 2 to 1, right? You know, that we talked about this when we talked about the sales mix, right? And we want to incorporate that sales mix in order to maximize our profitability. Okay. So it's interesting. In the textbook, they actually work backwards, all right? And I think it's like, if in order to have the same bottleneck hour, they have to set the selling price, I think, of the large wrenches at like $700 per wrench, right? Which is just unrealistic. Well, the last little area that we need to talk about is this concept of activity-based costing. All right, with activity-based costing, it does a better job of matching costs to either jobs or units. All right, so if you remember going way back, all right, to when we did job order costing and process costing, all right, you know, we had direct materials and direct labor. That was directly, and that's where the name comes from, directly tied to that product. However, when it came to fixed factory overhead as a whole, we allocated or applied factory overhead. All right. Well, when we did that, we basically did this. The process is called peanut butter costing. All right. We just said, hey, it doesn't really matter what this total factory overhead. Some are fixed, some are variable. Okay. We just allocated it based on what we use as direct labor hours. Okay? And so what activity-based costing does is it looks at alternative ways, all right, to allocate factory overhead. Right? And so, you know, this example, they could use either, you know, assembly, inspection, engineering design, right, are different examples, right? But I think a picture, right, paints 1,000 words. Okay. In the past, okay, we took, you know, all of factory overhead, okay, and we just divided this, okay, by direct labor hours, right? These were estimated direct labor hours. Okay. And if you remember, this was step number 1, okay, estimated factory overhead divided by estimated cost driver, okay, and this gave us our factory overhead rate. And then we multiply that times the actual direct labor hours. Okay. And that's how we got the applied factory overhead. Right? This is step 2. However, activity-based costing says, hey, you know, this factory overhead, okay, you know what, yeah, some of it, okay, is a direct labor, is a good cost driver. But, you know, a big chunk of this, it could be machine hours. Okay. This, it just might be straight line. Okay. And so instead of doing it all in one chunk, all right, we're going to say, we're going to take this and we're going to do direct labor hours, okay, as our cost driver. This one is going to be machine hours, okay, as our cost driver. And then this one, there is no cost driver, all right? This was the fixed cost, all right? And fixed is fixed, and so that's just going to come out at a flat rate, okay? This okay, is activity-based costing. Okay, cool. Well, that's the end of this chapter. All right, the rest don't really worry about. All right, we'll mostly focus in on all the stuff that we've covered here as far as exam. All right. All right. Well, that's it. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I will talk with you next time.